Picture this. You're 15 years old, and tonight, your childhood ends. Your father sold you to a man twice your age in exchange for 3 pigs and a sack of barley. Now you stand barefoot on cold rushes in a stone cottage that smells of smoke, sweat, and wet wool. Outside, drunken men bang spoons and chant for proof that the marriage has been sealed. Inside, Henrik, your husband, reaches for the leather cord around your neck. This isn't a love story. This is survival. Welcome to the medieval marriage bed, where desire, shame, and doctrine collide in ways that will haunt you forever. If you're drawn to the dark corners of history, the forgotten truths behind romance, religion, and power, then please hit the like button and subscribe. Every week we unearth stories that challenge our sanitized view of the past. And drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. It's incredible that these ancient echoes now reach across continents, pulled together by our shared curiosity. In 14th century Europe, marriage wasn't a celebration of love, it was a transaction. And Margot, like thousands of girls before and after her, was the currency. Her virginity wasn't a private matter, it was her dowry, her father's honor, and her husband's right, all bound into one fragile membrane. When Margot married Henrik in 1347, their wedding feast didn't end with dancing, but with a grotesque ritual called the bedding. Guests, often drunk, would drag the couple to the bedchamber, strip them, and sometimes even tuck them in, laughing, singing crude songs, and waiting just outside. The goal? To hear physical evidence that the marriage had been consummated. The sounds of pain, her pain, were proof. And if there was no blood on the sheets by morning, Margot's family could face humiliation. She might be sent home, called a fraud, or worse. It didn't matter that the hymen wasn't a reliable indicator of virginity. Medieval medicine believed it was a seal, a solid wall to be broken. They didn't know it could wear thin naturally or be torn by horseback riding or accidents. Still, women were expected to bleed, and if they didn't, many faked it. Chicken blood, finger pricks, or even paying another virgin to take their place on the wedding night weren't unheard of. But the rules didn't end after that first night. The church, ever present in every corner of medieval life, dictated when and how couples could be intimate. Missionary position only. No sex during Lent, Advent, or on holy days. No sex on Wednesdays or Fridays. No oral, no touching during menstruation, pregnancy, or breastfeeding. If you followed the rules exactly, you'd be allowed to be with your spouse about 50 days a year. And if you didn't? That wasn't just sin, it was damnation. Even inside a marriage, sex was supposed to be for procreation, not pleasure. Theologians like Thomas Aquinas warned that even enjoying your wife too much was adultery of the soul. If Henrik reached for Margot on a forbidden Wednesday and she gave in, her soul could be damned. If she refused, she risked violence. The law and the church were on Henrik's side. This was the reality of medieval marriage, a stage where performance was demanded and punishment loomed whether you played your part or not. Margot's world was governed by fear of sin, of shame, and of her own body. In medieval Europe, a woman's anatomy was a puzzle solved by superstition and guesswork. The leading belief passed down from Greek and Roman texts was that women were inverted men. Her vagina was an inside-out penis. Her ovaries, internal testicles. These ideas weren't fringe. They were taught in the best universities. Even sexual pleasure was misunderstood. Physicians like Constantine the African wrote that women needed multiple orgasms to conceive, leading to one dangerous conclusion. If a woman got pregnant from rape, she must have enjoyed it. In court, this logic was used to punish victims. If Margot ever found herself violated, pregnancy would condemn her, not protect her. Her mother may have whispered to her about the wandering womb, a mythical condition where the uterus traveled through the body, strangling the heart or escaping through the vagina. The treatments? Fumigating the genitals with sweet herbs to lure the womb back, or applying foul smells to the nose to drive it downward. This wasn't rare. It was standard medical advice. Fertility was a sacred and terrifying subject. Margot's neighbors might wear carved mandrake roots around their necks, shaped like tiny people. believed to increase the chances of bearing sons. They drank pennyroyal tea to avoid pregnancy, a dangerous brew where the line between contraception and poisoning was razor thin. Church teachings called these practices heresy, and those who used them often faced accusations of witchcraft. But desperation blurred every line. Women clung to hidden knowledge passed down from mothers and midwives, how to prevent birth, how to ease the pain, how to survive in a world where childbirth was often a death sentence. 1 in 3 women died during or shortly after delivery. Pregnancy wasn't just feared, it was political. A barren woman could be divorced. An unmarried one might be executed. If she gave birth in secret, her best hope was abandonment. Her worst? Accusation of infanticide. Margot lived in a world where her body was dangerous, sacred, and constantly watched. It was a vessel for family legacy, religious purity, and male control, but never truly hers. Even in moments of supposed intimacy, fear stalked her, not just of pain, but of eternal consequences. The church believed every part of the body had meaning. The wrong touch could pollute the soul. The wrong desire could summon demons. Margot wasn't taught how to understand her body, only how to fear it. In medieval Europe, even sanctioned intimacy could be sinful. Once Margot crossed the threshold into Henrik's home, she entered a lifetime of rules enforced by both heaven and earth. According to Saint Jerome, one of the church's early voices, a husband who enjoyed sex with his wife too much was guilty of adultery, even if he never strayed. Passion itself was considered a corruption. Thomas Aquinas went further. In his massive theological work, Summa Theologica, he laid out what was allowed. Man on top, face to face, purely for procreation. Anything else? Mortal sin. Pleasure, spontaneity, experimentation, all roads to hell. That meant Margot couldn't initiate. She couldn't enjoy it. She couldn't even want it. And if she did, she was warned her soul was already stained. Desire was a male privilege, and even then, tightly controlled. A man could sleep with his wife, but never when she was menstruating, pregnant, nursing, sick, or during holy days, which added up to most of the calendar. If he broke the rules, the sin wasn't just his, it was hers too. Margot could be damned for her husband's lust. What if she refused? That wasn't allowed either. A wife had no legal right to say no. Refusal could be punished with beatings, exile, or worse. The church recognized a husband's right to discipline his wife, even violently, for marital duty. And when it came to pleasure, women were doubly damned. If Margot seemed to enjoy herself, suspicion could follow. Was she promiscuous, possessed, or perhaps a witch? The medieval world was haunted by sexual demons. The succubus, a female spirit, was said to visit men at night and seduce them in their dreams. The incubus, its male counterpart, preyed on women, especially virgins, while they slept. These weren't fairy tales. They were accepted facts by the church and medical professionals alike. Women who suffered sleep paralysis, night terrors, or even dreams of intimacy were told they'd been attacked by demons, or worse, that they'd invited them in. Victims were often accused of witchcraft. To protect themselves, people carried talismans. Priests offered exorcisms. Whole villages would participate in rituals to banish spirits. But sometimes, it wasn't enough. If a woman like Margot was thought to have enticed a demon, willingly or not, she could be burned. Even dreams weren't safe. And yet, real pleasure still existed. Quiet, hidden, forbidden. In taverns and brothels, in the bawdy French fabliaux and the secret poems of wandering knights, a different vision of intimacy flickered to life. One where women laughed, flirted, and took lovers. But it was a dangerous game. In the shadows of every embrace, damnation waited. Margot had to live between worlds, one of bodily duty and one of whispered fantasy. She learned to survive in silence. She learned to lie without speaking. And in doing so, she became part of a long, unspoken history of women who bore the weight of everyone's desires but their own. For medieval women like Margot, virginity wasn't symbolic. It was legal tender. Entire family fortunes hinged on the assumption that their daughter had never been touched. Her body, unmarked and unopened, was more valuable than land, jewels, or cattle. That's why the wedding night was treated like a trial. Once Margot entered Henrik's bed, the expectations were clear. Blood must be shed. If none appeared, the shame wouldn't be hers alone. It would stain her entire lineage. The sheets would be checked, sometimes held aloft before neighbors. If there was no evidence of rupture, she could be returned, like defective merchandise. And in that moment, her word meant nothing. That's why girls like Margot often faked it. They pricked fingers, hid animal blood, staged their own destruction. Because the cost of failure was death, or worse. Medieval medicine made things harder. Physicians insisted the hymen was a full seal, a door that once opened could never be closed. No one understood that some girls were born without one, or that riding horses, dancing, or climbing could stretch or tear it naturally. And so, the absence of blood was proof of sin, proof of whoredom, proof of failure. All of this was sanctioned by the church. Canon law declared that a marriage wasn't valid until it was consummated. So, if a couple didn't have sex, especially on the first night, it wasn't legally binding. This gave men enormous power. Henrik could accuse Margot of deception, drag her to court, demand medical examinations. Church authorities would inspect her body for signs of penetration, interview her and Henrik separately, even question neighbors about what they heard through the wall. Imagine the terror of being cross-examined about your wedding night by a room of old men, some of them priests. Virginity became a public affair. In noble families, things were even worse. Political alliances hinged on the bride's purity. Dowries were paid, wars were avoided, titles exchanged, all on the promise of blood. And if that blood didn't appear? Treaties crumbled. Accusations of treason followed. The church's obsession with chastity led to bizarre customs. In some places, girls were inspected before marriage by midwives or clergy. Others had their genitals sealed with threads or charms. Some were kept in seclusion from puberty until marriage, monitored by female relatives to ensure no temptation touched them. But nothing could guarantee the proof society demanded. Margot might have spent her entire adolescence dreading a single night, knowing that her body had to perform, to bleed, to submit, whether it wanted to or not, and knowing that failure could kill her. In that sense, her body wasn't hers. It belonged to her father, until it belonged to Henrik. And in between, it belonged to everyone else's judgment. Love had nothing to do with it. This was commerce, and Margot's currency was her pain. Margot's life unfolded beneath a sky of judgment. Every step she took as a wife was shadowed by shame, suspicion, and sacrifice. And in her world, those weren't private feelings. They were legal facts. Medieval law treated women as property. Rape was not a crime against the woman herself, but against her owner, her father, her husband, or her lord. That meant her voice didn't matter. Her body was a possession, not a person. The punishment for rape varied wildly. A nobleman might pay a small fine for assaulting a peasant girl, but a poor man who touched a noblewoman could be hanged or tortured. Adultery was worse, but only for women. If Margot cheated, Henrik could kill her. On the spot. No trial, no penalty. And if she was caught with another man, both could be executed. Meanwhile, Henrik could visit prostitutes, sleep with his servants, or seduce widows, and no one would raise a finger. Honor was a one-way mirror. Among the nobility, courts devised strange rituals of engagement. Couples might be allowed to sleep in the same bed, clothed, separated by a wooden board, to test their compatibility. But for peasants like Margot, love rarely entered the equation. Her father chose Henrik. She said yes, or she starved. Even romantic love, the kind sung by troubadours and poets, wasn't meant for wives. The doctrine of courtly love taught that real passion could only exist outside of marriage. Knights pledged themselves to ladies they could never touch. They composed ballads of longing, pain, and spiritual purity. The idea was simple. Desire corrupted marriage, and marriage corrupted desire. So Margot was left with nothing. No ownership of her body, no right to refuse, no romantic story to cling to, just survival. She survived by learning the rules. She learned when to stay silent, when to cry, when to fake pleasure, when to pretend sleep, when to pray for rain to keep Henrik in the fields, when to hide herbs beneath her tongue to stop her womb from blooming again. And she was never alone. Millions of women lived this truth, voiceless, invisible, recorded only in midwife's notes, confession booth murmurs, and coroners' inquests. They were erased from history because their stories were too uncomfortable to preserve. But now, centuries later, Margot's story rises from the ash. It matters. Not because it's rare, but because it was common. This is not a tale of monsters and saints. It's not about evil husbands or wicked priests. It's about a system, a vast, ancient structure that turned intimacy into obligation, romance into silence, and love into fear. And Margot? She was a child forced to become a wife, a vessel wrapped in wool and warnings. She never asked to be remembered, but we remember her anyway.